What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the WASD and Beyond podcast. Today's episode is going to be just insane. This is something that we've been working on for the past couple weeks, back and forth. I got Brody with me, and I also have author and director of FPS Doc, David Craddock, with us. David, how are you doing today?
Man, I'm doing pretty well. I'm really glad to be here. I was entertaining an offer from your competitor, the ESDF podcast. So I'm glad to
Great.
be here on WASD.
Great. Well, we're glad you chose us. Um, wow, it's 10 a.m. in the morning, and we typically do not record this early, so I have been chalked up on I don't even know how many milligrams of Death Wish coffee. I am skittish. I'm ready to go. I know Brody is ready. I know you're ready. So let's just do this. David, for anyone out there who doesn't know who you are exactly, could you please tell them a little bit about your history, what you've worked on, and what you've done leading up to this documentary?
Absolutely. So again, my name is David Craddock. I've been an author and writer for a little over 18 years. I like to think of myself as a professional writer, which means I get paid usually for what I do. I've written over a couple dozen books, some novels, most about how video games are made, the people who make them, and the culture surrounding them, which is what fascinates me. And kind of the gig that led to me working on the FPS first person shooter documentary was I wrote a free to read book for shacknews.com, which is a 25 now 26-year-old website about video games. We publish news, reviews, previews, the works. And what I do there is I'm the long reads editor, which basically means they pay me to write a couple of books for them a year. You can read them free on the site. And our flagship long read is called Rocket Jump: Quake in the Golden Age of First Person Shooters. I know Richard Moss. He's another excellent writer, author, and video game historian. He was involved with FPS before I was, and he kind of put me in contact with Robin Block, who's the CEO and founder of Creator VC. That's the production company working on FPS. And Richard and Robin reached out to me. They brought me on. I started as kind of an advisor, moved up to producer, and then during our Kickstarter round of fundraising in 2021, Robin offered me the director job. So I've been juggling all these roles, movies, some books, but it's a great time, man. First person shooters are near and dear to my heart, so this project is a labor of love for me and the entire FPS team.
That's awesome, man. It's wild what kind of ride life will take you on. You start obviously getting into video games, especially like FPS is what led you here, right? You start writing books, and Rocket Jump is a book that I even messaged you about. I was like, hey man, how do I get my hands on this book? But and it leads up to FPS documentary. I first saw FPS documentary, I think last summer, and immediately I backed into it. I think I hit the Doom Marine pledge. What exactly led to documentary becoming an idea in all your heads, though? Like, what led to this movie and the importance of this movie nowadays for video games? Because I think there's a lot of not misunderstanding, but not there's knowledge out there, but I don't think people actively go out to seek the knowledge behind what created FPS gaming. This documentary is going to change that, I think. So, for you, what do you think really is the catalyst of that?
I think I wish Robin was here. He's actually in Hollywood right now at the premiere of another of our documentaries, In Search of Tomorrow, which is about sci-fi movies in the '80s, movies and
Nice.
TV.
That's
But
awesome.
this was, yeah, man. It's a great film. So really, this is kind of Robin's brainchild that he's kind of left in our care. He's still actively involved, but he grew up playing a lot of games. His favorite FPS was Halo 2, and he was in college. He loved it. And then he worked in film and television for a while before spinning out Creator VC, his own company, where he wanted to make documentaries about horror and sci-fi movies. Those are kind of his favorite hobbies. And he hadn't played games for a long time, but he remembered that he loved Halo, loved the FPS genre, and thought, if I was going to make a documentary about video games, I would want it to be on first-person shooters because those have broad mainstream appeal. It seems like everyone plays either, whether you grew up in the 90s like I did, playing Doom, Wolfenstein, Duke, Quake, Unreal, No One Lives Forever, you name it, or
Yeah.
whether more recent games like Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare, Halo, BioShock, etc., that there's something to love for everyone in FPS doc, and that's really kind of been the driving motivation as we've worked on this film, a movie that will stir a lot of nostalgia, but also take you behind the scenes to learn how some of your favorite games were made by us talking directly with the people who made them.
That's awesome, dude.
Yeah, that trailer.
It's been super exciting.
That trailer perfectly captures like exactly what you're saying too. I mean, I always hear them referred to Battlefield moments because they're always typically in Battlefield, right? But all these like highlights of just crazy stuff going on in each game as you transition. Which, mind you, the transitions were beautiful in that. Like it was seamless. I loved it. So the trailer is awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I can't even take credit for it. That was the whole team pitched in on that. I provided a lot of the footage you see, but that was the brainchild of Chris Stratton, our excellent video editor. Chris and I, so right now when we're recording this, it's kind of mid-February, and Chris and I, actually, I guess given that February is so short, we're almost veering into late February, but we're almost done with interviews, and after the next round of crowdfunding, we'll be going into post-production where Chris Stratton and Richard Moss and I will be working very closely on scripting the film and using all the interview footage and gameplay footage we've gathered to put together a movie that kind of gives you that same high octane adrenaline pumping feel that first trailer did. And Chris and I have been batting around ideas for the next trailer you'll see, where you'll actually get more of a preview of the interviews themselves. So if you think that one was good, we've got an even better one coming down the pipe.
Great. More
That's
dopamine
awesome.
rushes for my brain.
Exactly.
I'm excited. So what is the ultimate FPS game to you? What is the game that really kicked off your love for this genre?
You're sporting it on your shirt, man. One of you anyway. Doom. It's all about Doom for me. I've been playing FPS games since Wolfenstein 3D. There's a funny story there. When I was little, let's see, in 1992, I was 10. Discovered Mortal Kombat that same year, which I'm working on a book about that right now. But when I was sick, my mom would never let me stay home alone from school. She probably knew I just plotted to drag myself to the Nintendo or the PC to play games all day. So she was in medical transcription and terminology class at the time. So she made me go one day in particular with her. I would sit up at a desk, post up with all my books and whatever in the back of the room. And it's a room full of men and women working at computers, learning transcription, learning medical terminology. And at the front was the teacher. Her name was Sally Johnson. It's just this affable, lovely woman. And one day she had a really deep voice. So she goes, "David." And I looked up and I'm like, oh man, I'm not even in class and I'm getting called out by the teacher. I didn't even do anything. And so I go up to the front and she's beckoning. She's like, "Come here, check this out." So I go up and she's playing this game where she's running through a dungeon shooting Nazis. And I'm like, what is this? I'm so glad I missed school today because I was sick. And she gave me the Wolfenstein 3D shareware. I took that home, installed it on my PC. I didn't even have a Sound Blaster card yet. I was playing with the PC speaker sound effects. So it was a lot of beep, 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 and all that. And I remember when I eventually upgraded to a Sound Blaster 16, the volume was too high on the speakers. I got the chain gun, and I think my parents probably thought there was a shooting in the neighborhood or something because I about blew out those speakers. But yeah, I've been an FPS fan since Wolfenstein, and then Doom. Funny enough, I learned about in church, which seemed appropriate. I was in Sunday school. Oh yeah, man, get this. I was in Sunday school at the time, and I was in the back of the class, and this kid Aaron was like, "Hey man, you played Doom?" I was like, "No, what is Doom?" He's like, "Well, it's like you go to hell and you're shooting all these demons." I'm like, "Well, that seems okay. I feel like God would back that." So yeah, well, tell me more about this game. And yeah, I got the shareware from him, and I've been Wolfenstein 3D was great. Doom was even bigger. And my dad was a minister at the church, so I was kind of there whether or not I wanted to be. But I sure am glad I went to church as a kid because I discovered Doom. So what could be better?
That is, in church you discovered Doom.
Hey man, you're killing demons. You're doing God's work.
I'm sure John Romero at that point and Carmack would be like, "That's exactly what we wanted."
That's what we wanted. Our life's work is done,
dude. So you've, through this movie, gotten to interview plenty of industry titans. For you, what is that like? I mean, John Romero, John Carmack, Cliff Bleszinski. That's already, those are three people. That's a huge list right there. It's a tall glass. How is that for you to talk to these people, these titans?
It's still pretty wild, even though I've been doing it for a lot of the books I've written over, over 18 years now. I've talked to John Romero several times. I interviewed him about a book of Apple II games that I wrote about, and he actually wrote an endorsement for me. I interviewed John Carmack over email because of his exponentially busier schedule, but this time I actually got to sit down face to face with them. Many guys like John Romero I've spoken to numerous times. But this was my first time talking with Cliff Bleszinski, which was awesome, and he's so kind. He read my Mortal Kombat book, wrote a really nice endorsement for that. So getting to actually develop rapport with a lot of these people who, growing up, they're just their names on your screen or in the instruction manuals, and now I'm, I was so bummed. So the way we do this production because of COVID is we hire camera crews in the area who will go to a contributor, whether they're home or office, or maybe we'll book a hotel suite or a studio, and the contributor will come in. And when we went to Dallas to talk to John Carmack and Janelle Jaquace and a whole bunch of other folks, John Carmack said, "Oh, I was hoping to finally meet you in person. I was going to take you to one of the free-to-play arcades in Dallas." So I'm like, damn it, COVID, I could have hung out playing arcade games with John Carmack for a day. But the experience of just getting to talk to him was more than enough for me.
Right.
Yeah.
That is wild. I
should have tried to get a rain check on that one. Be like, hey, I know we don't need to interview anymore, but I would still like to go play games with you.
Oh yeah, that's gonna happen eventually for sure.
That's awesome.
That's insane, man. Brody, do you have anything you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this has been not necessarily entirely crowdfunded, but that definitely has been a big portion of it, and basically getting the community involved in that. What really, like, what's the pros and cons of doing it that way, and rather than like a traditional movie, I guess, in some regard, and what has been the best part about it?
For sure. That's a great question. We go the crowdfunding route because it allows us to go straight to the fans. If this were, I mean, you guys know that in 2022, we're kind of being just stampeded by a constant deluge of media.
Yep.
And it can be hard to kind of weed through all that and find content you're really interested in that you would want to support if only you knew about it. Crowdfunding allows us to broadcast a signal far and wide saying, hey, if you love this thing, come support this, come be a part of it. And in fact, that's what we did with the Kickstarter campaign. At or above a certain level, you get producer credit. You can kind of weigh in on the cast list. We'll be kind of crowdsourcing a lot of gameplay footage from anyone who wants to say, oh, hey, I did that sweet trick or glitch that they're talking about right now. That's my gameplay footage. And really it's about forging a connection with the people who have a connection to first person shooters.
Yeah.
Right. Cause that's how, like I said, that's how I saw it on social media one day. My buddy Eric from Wales actually sent me a link, was like, hey, you need to check this out. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, it's another Kickstarter, but I saw what it said and I'm like, this resonates with me. I need to check this out. Okay. I watched the trailer. And immediately I was like, all right, Apple Wallet is ready and we're doing this. But that's the power behind something like a Kickstarter, especially for you guys, is somebody from Wales is sending me this going, check this out, dude.
Yeah.
I got right into it, backed it, and now we're here. But it's insane. Social media is such a double-edged sword in that regard. It really is.
Yeah, it is. You handle that sword and you'll probably cut yourself, but at least you'll get some of the hits you want in there too. I mean, again, I have to give credit to Robin. I think the reason that people were so enthusiastic. One reason people were so enthusiastic about backing FPS is because, Robin and Creator VC have a stellar track record. They made In Search of Darkness 1 and 2, which is about 80s horror movies,
Yep.
interviewing, directors and stars like Robert Englund, Freddy Krueger. And so people could look at this and go, oh, this isn't just some random group of people. They've made movies. And then what Robin wanted to do was build a team of folks like me, like Richard Moss, like Chris Stratton, people who are passionate about these games. And that's one thing I've learned. The team, we not only love first-person shooters, but we love them enough to kind of compare and contrast our roots. Chris and Richard, their first kind of groundbreaking moment playing FPS games was GoldenEye. I come from the Wolfenstein 3D and Doom. Robin loves Halo. So it's really our team is not only trying to make something that appeals to FPS fans of all stripes, but we're representative of those stripes as well.
Right. And I really think something like this could bring more people into the FPS genre itself. Because like right now, I wouldn't say there's a lull within the genre. There's plenty of games coming out. There are plenty of titles on the market. But the lull comes from repetitive game types at this point, i.e. Battle Royale at this point. I mean, you have your Apex Legends, which is killing it. But if you look back, we had arena shooters. And that's where I see FPS going back into, which leads me to this question. Do you think, with the current lull from AAA studios especially, that the indie studios, like Night Dive, for instance, coming out with the System Shock remake,
right,
do you think that these indie studios are kind of taking back FPS to be that, like, underground scene back in, like, the LAN days?
Oh yeah, another great question. I completely agree. I think what we're seeing in the AAA space, as you described it, as a lull. It's a homogenization because escalation changes the scale of what publishers expect to make financially. When you look at something like Doom sold over 1 million copies, and it's sold a lot more now because the game is so ubiquitous. You can play it on almost anything. In fact, that's the meme, right? Will Doom run on, my toaster? The answer is probably yes.
Yes.
But then as the expectations went up, and you wanted to sell from hundreds of thousands to millions to tens of millions, publishers, kind of understandably, because game development is so risky, they wanted to back safer bets. And that means Call of Duty, that means Battlefield, that means Battle Royale. And so I think in the indie space, yes, you're seeing not only a resurgence of retro style shooters, but you're seeing a lot of innovation there, because it's not that indie game development is easy. It is not. I've actually worked in game development as well as written about it. But there's, you can sell 100,000 copies that you and a few friends made, and that's a profit for you. Whereas for Ubisoft or Activision, that's nothing. That is a colossal failure. And so because of that difference in scale, indie developers can take more risks. And I think you're seeing that, just to zoom out a little bit, not only in FPS, but I remember for a while, survival horror was, even Capcom, Resident Evil 6, which was just abysmal to me as an RE fan, was trying to be Call of Duty. But then you saw things like Penumbra and Amnesia: The Dark Descent that were taking chances. And then on a smaller scale, PT, which was sort of a AAA game because it was Konami, but it was released for free. When that sort of thing gains traction, AAA companies like Capcom will take notice of it and hopefully maybe go back to what the players want, to what they think will make them money. And that's how Resident Evil 7 kind of came about, just as a cross-genre example there. So yeah, that's why with Rocket Jump I call it the subtitle Quake in the Golden Age, Golden Era, I think, of first-person shooters, because the 90s, what I loved about it is you had such diversity in characters, in settings, in weapons, in map design, in narratives, in multiplayer modes. It's because everyone was experimenting back then. There was not a guaranteed moneymaker until really, Call of Duty 4 started selling the way it did, and all the publishers had to go, okay, we're making that now because that's what people are buying.
Yep. That's the new model. That's what that's what we're going to stick to.
Yep, because that'll make us a profit, right? You got to make a profit.
Right.
To kind of tie into that with the indie developers and things like that, I mean, you wrote the Shovel Knight book for Boss Fight Books. What was it like working on that project? Because I mean, from the outside looking in, like the Yacht Games is just so generous to their fans. Like, they have basically given away all the DLC. They're finally now able to work on other things. What was it like sitting down and talking to these guys and just discussing, you know, this whole process and how crazy that Kickstarter program was for them?
That was the process of writing that book was almost as wild as their journey from concept to completion. So when I emailed Yacht Club Games in, I guess it was late 2013, maybe 2014. Yeah, it was 2014 because Shovel Knight came out that year, I'm pretty sure. They were working on the first DLC, and I said, hey, at the time I was actually starting a magazine, a digital magazine called Episodic Content. And the idea was to serialize stories. So you'd get in every issue one chapter about the development of a AAA game, one chapter about an indie game, and one interview. And I said, I love Shovel Knight. I'd love to talk to you guys about that. And at first, only David D'Angelo was one of the 5 co-founders, was free. So I wrote a really small book, 70, 80 pages, just based on my interviews with David. And I emailed Yacht Club just to give them a heads up. Hey, I think I'm going to start publishing this. And they got back to me and they said, you can do that if you want, but we've always dreamed of working with Boss Fight Books. So what if you would take your book to them? And if you can get them on board, we'll make time for you to interview all of us. And so that's kind of how Shovel Knight, which I originally was called Gameplay Per Square Inch. And I named one of the chapters that, just kind of a little wink and a nod to the original book title. That's how that kind of ballooned into getting to talk to more of the Yacht Club co-founders and to get Boss Fight Books behind it. So that was really exciting for me. Besides FPS, I would say 2D platformers are probably it's my favorite genre. I grew up on Mario and games like the original Donkey Kong, like a lot of players from my generation. And so getting to write about a company that's doing just what we talked about, right? Like they were taking something that wasn't really being paid attention to by AAA companies and trying to expand on it. A little bit of Mario, a little bit of Zelda 2, which I've always felt is kind of underrated, a little bit of DuckTales from NES, and a little bit of their own sense of humor and style, and that Shovel Knight. And so getting to write that project was really special as well.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
The
Brody?
Yeah. So obviously we're focusing on FPS and everything, right? But what is and now that you've mentioned your favorite genre is some 2D platformer, what's your favorite game outside of the FPS genre, or favorite game in general? It can be in the FPS, but just a casual question for you.
So I replay a lot of games. In fact, these days I'm probably replaying older games more than I'm playing new games, just because when I'm writing about games, I tend to be very immersed in whatever book or in this case film I'm working on. I would say my favorite game of all time, it goes back and forth between Zelda Ocarina of Time or Breath of the Wild. Honestly, as a game player, I'm a very systems driven person. I actually don't really care about stories in games because I think most of them aren't that great. There are some good ones, and if the story is good, I'll get pulled in. I'll enjoy it. But I'm a big reader too, so I have books for stories, and I have games for just the systems. What can I do in this game that I can't do in real life without, maybe getting dragged away in a padded suit or going to prison? And the Zelda games to me have always been about exploration, about experimentation. And I just enjoy those so much. It's why I still replay Doom to this day. I love to replay it with different mods just to see how the community has kept that game going for over 25 years, closing in on 30. There's just so much out there, even with just Doom. Doom and the Zelda games are definitely in my top 5 of all time.
I'm a massive Zelda fan, so I am stoked to hear that.
Are you sure you are?
Yeah, just a little bit.
Just a little bit, Breath of the Wild 2 win. I in their latest financials, they said it's on track for this year. So,
I hope, man. I hope.
I don't want to hear any Breath of the Wild or Zelda fan complain when Half-Life 3 is 1,000 years away. I made a joke. I made a joke when I was younger about Half-Life in general, because I'm a huge Half-Life fan. I got Gordon everywhere in my room. There's something Half-Life there. I got the gravity guns right there. But I made a joke when I was a lot younger after I played Half-Life 2, and I think I was like 21 at this time. And I said to my buddies, I was like, by the time I get a new Half-Life, I will have a child. Flash forward to now, I'm 30. and I have a child, and Half-Life Alyx had can't come out.
Yeah.
I was like, I told you guys, where's my money?
You
and everyone's
called
like, dude, like, back up, man. We're not giving you the money. I'm like, but I told you, we bet.
But I told you the thing.
I told you the thing, and it happened. But
yeah, no,
No.
so I also got to speak with Robin Walker and John Cook about their time at Valve, Team Fortress, Half-Life
Yep.
Alyx. So you'll get we're not really supposed to be revealing the full game list at this point, but I'm not. We're talking Half-Life. And it's kind of one of those things where, like, if anyone could go on the Kickstarter and look at our cast list and figure, oh, they're probably talking about X, Y, and Z for sure. So yeah, we're going to be mentioning Half-Life once or twice in this documentary.
Yeah, I might have a panic attack while you do that throughout the entire film.
Honestly, Half-Life 1, I loved 2 as well, but Half-Life 1 especially is a very special game to me. So getting to talk about that was a joy.
That's phenomenal, man. I'm anything in the Half-Life sphere, Doom sphere, Quake sphere is just always encapsulating for me, and I just slide right in. Like, I think Mark Laidlaw, when he dropped Epistle 3, I read through it, the entire thing, and I was like, why would you guys let this slip out of your hands? Anyways, though.
Yeah, Valve is a strange company. I love what they're doing, but it seemed like for a while they were like, oh, we have Steam and we sell hats, and I'm like, you're not a haberdashery. What do you give us Half-Life? Make games again. And I hope that the success of Half-Life Alyx, which was phenomenal, has kind of convinced them, like, hey, there's still gas left in this tank. So we'll see.
Well, going right into VR. How deep into VR do you guys go into this documentary, if at all? Because right now it's seeming like with Half-Life 3, and then you had Boneworks, it really seems like VR is kind of, I'm not saying the future of gaming, because I think we are far, far off from that being anywhere close to like a Ready Player One-esque thing.
Yes.
But within the documentary, do you guys touch on VR at all? Because I do think it's becoming important in the gaming sphere with, again, Boneworks and Half-Life Alyx coming out.
Yeah, we do definitely touch on it. Like I said, you'll learn a little bit about Half-Life Alyx, but to be honest, overwhelmingly, when we polled backers, the era they wanted us to focus on was the 90s into the early 2000s. Now, we actually go back even further, a couple of decades, to learn about, the true first-person shooters. So you'll get that knowledge as well. But yeah, really, I love VR first-person shooters. I think one of my favorites is probably Super Hot, which I played the regular version before I played the VR version, and I feel like the VR version almost killed me. I was so sore the day after I first tried it, because you're like Neo, but without the flexibility of bullet time. And but yeah, we will be touching on it, but we won't really delve into it, just because I feel like Half-Life Alyx was almost the Doom of first-person shooters for VR. It was kind of like people saying, like, here's what we can do, now let's build on this, and we're still working on that path, I think.
Right, because that's our first true look into what Source 2 can offer.
Right.
Because I don't necessarily remember when the original Source came out. I was so young. But I remember playing Half-Life 2, and I remember playing all these games that came with it, and I was like, whoa, like, the physics, like, breakable, like, objects, like just picking up the can. And I was like, this is insane. My mind is blown. It's just insane.
I remember seeing the graphics, and I was living at home. I was in college at the time, and I had my computer just adjacent to my bedroom window. And I remember just looking at, I think it's the first scene where you go outdoor and get your first look at City 17 with soldiers patrolling a courtyard.
Yep.
And I remember just kind of, looking out my bedroom window, and I'm like, I don't think graphics can get any better, because this looks real. And of course, I made a fool of myself, because that was 2004, and they're a lot better. But man, at the time, the Source engine just blew me away.
I would argue that Half-Life 2 is still a very pretty. And now, once you get too close to any object, no, but it in of itself is beautiful to look at still.
Oh yeah, the stylization is damn near timeless. I think that game holds up very well.
Yes.
So you've obviously got to work with some incredible people over the course of not only this documentary, but also, the span of all your books. I mean, you've done like the game dev stories as well. And so really, you've had some awesome interviews with some great developers and very well-known people. Specifically for the doc itself, who was who's your favorite person to interview for it? And then outside of the doc, who has been your favorite person to interview?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say for the doc, I've really this is going to sound like a cop out, but I will give you an honest answer. I've enjoyed all the interviews because everyone we've interviewed has been so excited to share their part of this story.
Yeah.
It's kind of like we're all making a quilt together, and their patch is just as important as all the other patches.
Right.
But getting to sit and talk with John Carmack, those 2 hours just flew by. That guy can talk about anything. I would say outside of that, probably David Brevik, co-founder of Blizzard North, co-creator of Diablo. I have Stay a While and Listen 1 was the first book of mine that really broke out. It was a bestseller. And I would drive. I lived in the San Francisco Bay Area at the time. I would drive to Gazillion Games, where I also got to do some writing on Marvel Heroes Online, which was pretty cool.
Oh, nice.
But I would meet Dave. He'd walk down to the lobby. We'd walk a few blocks to the Starbucks, just walking and chatting about what games we were playing, what was going on, and then we'd sit for an hour, talk Diablo, and I would hold my recorder while we walked back to continue the conversations. And Dave's just a great guy. He spoke very candidly. He wasn't afraid to hold anything back. And those are always the best interviews, when you don't have to kind of poke and prod and do a lot of digging to get people to tell you what you need to know for the story you're writing. So yeah, Dave Brevik stands out a lot.
That's awesome. Diablo, again, is just a classic industry titan.
Yes.
When I saw that you had a book, Stay a While, Listen, I was like, I can just hear it in my head for the first time. I threw that CD into my PC way back when I was like 11. Deckard Cain, just stay a while, listen. And I was like,
that's right. Yeah.
Dude, my just exploded. But
yeah,
were there any, to go back to the film, were there any major hurdles that you guys really had to, I guess, jump over to continue production? And I don't want to dive too deep into COVID, because I think a lot of people are so sick of hearing about COVID.
Yeah.
I'm sure that was a hurdle you guys had to overcome. Were there any hurdles as a result of that, or just in general for the making of this film?
There's definitely some COVID-related hurdles, but nothing that I think anyone is unaccustomed to jumping at this point. You know, we make sure the camera crews we hire are vaccinated and that they wear masks and maintain social distancing, with the exception of things like, a lot of contributors need help getting mic'd up, which, is totally understandable. I hate dealing with lapel mics and all that stuff as well. But I would say otherwise, the tricky part of what we've been dealing with for the last few weeks is we're interviewing people in other hemispheres. So the time differences can make for it can make scheduling pretty difficult. I'm up for talking any hour of the day. It's not necessarily something I want to do, but I'm up for it because it's part of the job. But, when you're a day in the past dealing with someone who's living in a day in the future, something maybe comes up for them that you don't know about until minutes before you're supposed to start, because you're just waking up and checking your phone to make sure you're good to go. So definitely the juggling time zones has been a hurdle as well. Not a big one, but it's there, and there's nothing you can really do about it.
Right.
Yeah, we've tried to do a couple shows with some people across the pond, and it definitely is a challenge when you're talking a major difference, and it complicates things way more than you would expect.
Yeah, we're over the past couple weeks, we've been trying to set up an interview with G-Man Lives from YouTube, and either he's had something come up, or we've had something here the other week. Not to get too into it, but we had a studio that told us they'd have enough room, but they didn't, and so that required a lot of logistical maneuvering. It just didn't work out, so we had to postpone the interview another week. And it's not like a huge deal. I'm just one of those people who, I don't like to inconvenience anyone. I don't like to waste anyone's time. So I feel bad, even though it wasn't my fault. But he's been super cool about it, and we'll get to talk to him soon enough.
For this documentary as well, did you guys find that it's also important not to just talk to these high grade titans of the industry, but to talk to creators such as G-Man Lives or any other content creator out there, because at this point, while the industry titans are important, they will always be important. I really feel like the industry itself is on the backs of creators like you, like G-Man Lives. Like, we are the ones pushing the content out, showing off their games. So how important was that for you guys to capture with content creators themselves?
It's definitely been a high priority, and again, I give kudos to Robin here because he told Richard and me, Richard and I collectively kind of went out and we're the ones who put together the cast list. We're like, we need to talk to these people, get them on camera. And, I agree with you. I think one of the games industry's problems is it has a lot of inferiority complexes. It constantly compares itself to cinema when it doesn't need to be film. It has so many more strengths that it can be its own thing. And it also has a tendency to promote certain quote unquote rock stars. John Romero and John Carmack did incredible work on Wolfenstein, Commander Keen, Doom, Quake, etc. But they worked with teams of people who helped them along the way. And so that's actually when I write a book, the Mortal Kombat book, for example, yes, I talked to John Tobias. I also talked to a lot of other people, because even though Mortal Kombat kind of begins and ends with John Tobias and Ed Boon, you have to get the perspective of the managers at Midway, some of the programmers, some of the audio engineers, some of the members of the other teams who were kind of across the aisle seeing Mortal Kombat success while they were working on their own thing. And so that's what we were doing with FPS as well. Yeah, we talked to John Romero, John Carmack, Cliff Bleszinski, but we also talked to, for example, for GoldenEye, we talked to Carl Hilton and Brett Jones, who were both instrumental in GoldenEye. We talked to several developers, current and former Bungie developers, about the Halo series. Janelle Jaquace was a brilliant level designer in Quake 2 and Quake 3, so we talked to her, just so you can get that perspective of, okay, we've heard from, the rock stars, the managers higher up, and now we're going to talk to level designers. Now we're going to talk to artists. Now we're going to talk to marketers. So Jim Vevert was, he was at Sierra when they got Half-Life from Valve and talked about what it was like to market Half-Life. And that posed an interesting challenge for him, because that was, if you recall, the first-person shooter genre. We're so used to saying FPS, but it wasn't always known as that. For the longest time, they were Doom clones.
Yep.
And the Half-Life was really the first game that made people go, this isn't like Doom. Like, yes, it's first-person and you are shooting a shotgun, but there's so much more to it than what Doom offered. So we need, and over time, this broader genre definition took shape. And so we're trying to talk to as many people like creators such as G-Man, marketers. We talked to Randy Fitzgerald, the world's first quadriplegic pro gamer, to get his perspective on games like Call of Duty. And that's very, very important to me, because I want to hear from as many people as possible, because these games have touched so many people. So my hope is that as fans watch this, they'll see some of themselves in these people. Even if you don't want to make video games, you'll see people who kind of lived the dream, who worked really hard and built something beautiful and realized, like, hey, they're not all just rock stars. I could do this too. I can chase my dreams and achieve them.
Which leads to things literally like what we're doing right here, what you've done with your books, leading up into FPS. And I think that's important for the younger audience who will be watching this film, because I guarantee a lot of the new age gamers, because I mean, I'm 30, I'm an old dude now, whatever, right? Like,
Right.
But for these young cats coming into gaming, I think for them to see all of this is important. And I guess leading up to that, how important is it for your team and you specifically, for these younger gamers and new people coming into gaming right now, to see, hey, this is what it's about. This is where it started.
I'm laughing because I'm recalling this was about, I don't know, 6 to 8 years ago. I was at a family reunion on my wife's side, and there's a kid there. He's not a kid now, but he was then, named Nick, and he kind of, became my shadow, wanted to talk about video games. And he thought Halo was the first person shooter because he's young enough that was the first one he played, and he didn't have a PC that, you just don't think about these games that really, you think about Doom. Doom is one of the most important games ever made. Is it still on shelves? Physical shelves? No, not really. It's on digital shelves, but there's so many digital games out there. Again, you have to know where to look.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of gamers, I think there are a lot of gatekeepers in gaming. They might go like,
Oh, yeah.
"Oh, you dumb kid, you don't know." Whereas me, it was like, "Oh no, let me tell you about Doom. Let me tell you about Half-Life. Let me tell you about these games that kind of paved the way." And I think that's what we're going to do with with FPS, the documentary, because we talked to some of the co-creators of Maze War, which was a game made on mainframes at MIT. That was actually the first-person shooter. But a lot of people, even people in the industry, and no offense to them, because Maze War was only on mainframes. You couldn't go out and buy a mainframe to play it at home or with your buddy at his house. Unless you were on a university campus or in the military or in a lab somewhere, you didn't have access to mainframes. So, there's this illusion that, oh, hey, id Software created FPS. They didn't. They popularized it. Mm-hmm. But that's different than created. And so we're going to go all the way back to show you the very beginnings, kind of wading through the primordial ooze of this genre, and then move forward through the 90s, through the 80s, the 90s, and the early 2000s.
That's amazing. This almost seems like it could be, and I'm just prying at this point, almost a 2-part documentary, though. Like, that's like with how much attention to detail you and your team, and the team, rather, are putting into this movie, this documentary. It doesn't seem like it's going to stop it couldn't stop at a 1 part.
We're kicking around ideas for maybe not a sequel, but a pseudo sequel. The fear we have is that if we made a part 2, like some companies, we might not know how to count to 3. But no, honestly, there are no plans for FPS 2, but we are thinking like, hey, some of these games are worth movies of their own. So we're just kind of spitballing right now about what if we would do almost like expansion packs, but standalone expansion packs, so that even if you didn't see FPS, which you should, but even if you didn't, you could watch this other movie about this specific game or this specific subgenre of FPS, such as military-themed shooters. Your Rainbow Sixes, your CODs, your Medal of Honors, games like that. So those are just things we're kind of kicking around right now while we're still working on FPS.
Awesome.
Yeah, I know recently I watched there was a Bungie documentary. I don't remember if that was NoClip that I watched that through or who it was, but it just that focus on, like you were saying, Doom typically gets that credit, but I also see where the Halo part of it comes from, because it was mainly the first console FPS. So it's almost like they got their own grandfather rights of some sort, to where it's like, hey, Doom got this and Halo got this. But it's very interesting because, like you said, a younger kid he knows what Doom is from 2016, or maybe a few games that came out after the fact. But that original Doom back on PC, and like you said, that's not the first, but it is the one that popularized it, and that it gets put in that limelight.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's the thing about Bungie. We also talked about, a lot of people forget that they made the Marathon series, which was exclusive to Mac until I think Marathon 2 Durandal came to Xbox Live Arcade in the mid 2000s. So, we get to talk about that. And that's near and dear to the heart of my colleague Richard Moss. One of his, I think the book he's best known for is The Secret History of Mac Gaming, which is, it's an entire book dedicated on games that started on Mac. We also talked to David Allen Smith for FPS, who wrote a game called The Colony, which was another early first-person shooter, but it was Mac only, so nowhere near as many people heard about it as did Wolfenstein 3D and Doom.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people don't know about Marathon. That, for me, I'm like, what do you mean you don't know about Marathon? That's before Halo, man.
Yeah. Then you
got to realize Mac back in the day. Yeah, it's like, okay, it makes sense.
Yeah, there were plenty of Mac games, but for a variety of reasons. I mean, Steve Jobs never saw the Mac as a gaming platform, whereas Steve Wozniak with the Apple II kind of did. He was the one who fought for, in that computer, adding extra expansion bays so people could do things like add more memory, add peripherals like printers and modems. But then the Mac was kind of closed, and it was a business machine. And so the games on it just didn't get enough of a spotlight, but there were plenty of formative, influential games on it. We're going to highlight some of those.
Awesome. And do you think
that's awesome.
with this documentary, there's going to be something for all sorts of gamers? Because obviously you got PC gamers, Linux gamers, Mac gamers, console gamers, from handhelds to the retro console gamers as well. There's retro PC gamers who literally still build old computers to retain their original versions of their games. Is there something in this documentary for everybody, even if you're not into the FPS genre?
I would say absolutely, yeah, because even if you're not into a specific type of games such as FPS, these are really at their core, these are action games. These are games about exploration. These are games about kind of environmental puzzle solving, exploration. And I would say that even if you're a fan of games, broadly speaking, mainly maybe only passively familiar with FPS, I think you'll find a lot to love here because we'll be talking about games and creators of games that had a huge influence on the industry and games they made from there. It's interesting how that cross pollination happens. For example, another best game, or one of the most important games of all time, Resident Evil 4, this action survival horror game. Now it's pretty unlike Gears of War, but Cliff Bleszinski was still heavily inspired by Resident Evil 4. So you could argue that without RE4, maybe Gears of War would never have existed, or would not have existed in the form that it did. So I think even if you're not a fan of Doom or Quake or Halo or COD, you'll find enough of gaming history and influence here to see, oh wow, there's not many degrees of separation from these games to my favorite type of game.
Right. Right. Brody?
Yeah, I mean, are there any big surprises? Obviously, I know you can't go into detail on this by any means, but can you put out any hints as far as like a big surprise that we might see in this doc that, you know, somebody might not be expecting? Again, I know you're limited on what you can say, but at the same time, I mean, any hints are cool, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. I'll give you a hint. Doom was originally written to run on up to 3 monitors at once.
Really?
Wow.
This is before the days. I have like 4 screens in front of me right now. A lot of people have 2.
Yeah.
But this is Doom, 1993, a game made for not just 2 monitors, but 3. How did that work? I don't know. Maybe I'll have to watch and find out.
Is there even a desk that can hold 3 of those big ass monitors?
There was not back then, man. Not the desks I used for my
CRTs,
LAN
right?
Right.
Oh, yeah, we're talking CRTs. Those are big
those
boys.
things are heavy.
Yeah.
Holy
That's
cow.
why I remember to this day, my 3 closest friends from high school and we still get together for a New Year's Eve LAN party. Actually, I haven't been as regular because we're living all over the country now, starting families. But I remember one year we were like, you know what? We're feeling kind of old. We were like 24 at the time. They're like, let's not carry CRTs and desktops and towers and stuff. Let's just play Nintendo DS. So we played Mario Kart. But the next year we were like, that was fun, but let's get some Half-Life Deathmatch going again. Because we love playing like the Rats and Turkey Burgers, custom maps. And now though we do it with laptops, and like one of us who brings a monitor is like, oh, look at you with your external monitor.
Big guy over here.
That's right. But still playing the classics, just on contemporary hardware.
Yeah, that's pretty much where I'm at nowadays.
Right.
Again, with the lull in the genre, a lot actually in gaming itself right now. There's a lot coming out, but then there's a lot where I'm like, it just gets lost on me. I can't get interested. So there's a lot of cool stuff coming out, such as like Elden Ring next week, that I am ready to get lost in.
Yeah.
I don't think my wife
played
is ready.
Literally thousands of hours of the Souls games. So Elden Ring, to me, if you look at it, I'm like, and I don't mean this in a bad way. I'm like, oh, so this is Dark Souls 4. Cool, I'm in. You know,
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm ready for that.
That's what I said.
Yeah.
I'm not even a Souls fan, and I'm excited for Elden Ring. It's very bizarre. I'm not. Usually, I'll get too frustrated, but for whatever reason, this one is
mystique around that company, right? Like
Absolutely.
whatever you do, you know it's special, even if it's not your thing. You're like, this is a big deal. I get that.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, this is a big release, and I mean this month has been entirely packed with different releases and things like that. I mean, aside from Elden Ring, are there any big games that you're looking forward to coming out here soon?
I have trouble keeping. I know 2022 is packed. Like we talked about earlier, like Breath of the Wild 2. I feel like because Pokemon just came out. Like Nintendo likes to bookend. They like a game in quarter 1. They like a summer game, which is probably, I think it's Splatoon 3 this year.
Yep.
And then they like a big fall release.
Mm-hmm.
So a couple of things, just because I'm a Nintendo fan. I love Mario Kart. Love Mario Kart 8. That's been my favorite entry in the series since the Wii U, and I'm pretty stoked about the 48 DLC courses that they'll be rolling out over the next couple of years. Capcom they haven't announced it yet, but they're working on the RE4 remake. I'm pretty excited about that because the remake of RE2 and 3 were some of my favorite games of the past few years. Yeah, there's probably some I'm forgetting, but Elden Ring is definitely a big one. My wife, I'm lucky enough that I married a gamer. She loves Souls as well. We actually have 2 TVs, 2 sets of consoles set up in the living room. We're going to be playing through Elden Ring together this coming weekend, so that'll be fun.
You are living like the dream, dude.
Yeah.
Dream, man.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, it's funny. When the first time she came over, it was in college. I was living at home. She came over and was just playing my video games. I'm like, am I being used? And am I okay with that? Yes, And so, because I just had this, sprawling collection even then, so it was all right.
There is one thing I wanted to ask. It's kind of about the doc, kind of just about physical media itself. Mm-hmm. In your perspective, how important, with all the acquisitions happening in gaming, with everything going to a Xbox Game Pass or a PlayStation Pass or whatever, which I do like Xbox Game Pass. I think it's really cool to help people who can't afford games have an entry point. In $15 a month, you can play all these new titles. But we have things like limited run games, which I love them. It takes a long time for their stuff to get to you, but it's worth it.
It's worth it. Yeah.
How important is the physical aspect of gaming, like just preservation? I guess is where I want to go into that, because when you own something physically, in my opinion, you never can lose that. I have physical media that if I wanted to pop in, I can play it somehow.
Yeah, I would say that objectively, it's very important because. Okay, so as much as I love Nintendo, it's kind of a love-hate relationship because I think they've been draconian for a long time. And you probably know what I'm referring to. Most recently, they've announced that they're going to pull the plug on the Wii U and 3DS eShops. And the problem with that is that there are a lot of games that were only released digitally and on those platforms that will essentially cease to exist. And the obvious alternative is emulation. I'm a proponent of emulation, not to steal games, but because maybe that's the only way we'll be able to preserve some of these classics.
Yeah.
But they do everything they can to kind of thwart that as well. They lobby, they give money to organizations that prevent libraries from getting new games because they've never liked it when you rent games. In fact, I had a friend who taught English in Japan for 3 years. Renting games is not possible in most parts of Japan because of Nintendo. And I'm like, Nintendo, I love you, but also kind of fuck you, Nintendo, because that's not cool. I hope that it's okay.
No, you're good. You're absolutely good.
You are totally good.
This has been the most calm we've ever been.
This is the most calm we've been on a podcast.
I would say physical media is definitely important. That's why certainly you'll be able to get FPS digitally. That's probably how I'll watch it most of the time, just because it's convenient to just call up. But will I also have that nice box with the disc in it on my shelves? Absolutely, because if I would ever lose access to a digital account or something, I'll be able to pop that disc in and still watch a film that I made. Which I say that kind of as a thought of experiment, because I've never gone back and read a book I've published because I'm just sick of it by the time it comes out. So by the time you guys watch this, I'll be like, oh, okay, good. I'm never going to watch it again, but I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Right.
Physical media is very important for the preservation of history. That's why I write a lot about older games, not necessarily out of nostalgia, but because today with deluxe editions, you might get an art book that has behind the scenes information, or a documentary, or you might get a post-mortem on a website or something. But games like Doom, like Diablo, like Mortal Kombat, they were written before. Those game developers are so busy doing their jobs, they're not really thinking about, wow, we're making history, because you don't have time to think of that.
Right.
In fact, I was talking to one of the to Frank Cifaldi, the founder of the video game History Foundation. And he said that when they in Digital Eclipse reached out to Capcom to put together the Street Fighter Anniversary Collection, he was stunned to find that the person he talked to was like, "Oh, anything from Street Fighter 2? That game is really old. I don't know that we kept anything because it's Street Fighter 2, one of the most important games ever made." But to them,
I mean,
this is like the M. Bison quote. But for me, it was Tuesday. Like it was just,
Yeah.
it was just their job at the time, right? Like they were just, this was the game on their plate, and then they're going to move on to the next game on their plate. It's only in retrospect that you realize you made history, and by then it might be too late to think about it. So for preservation's sake, yeah, physical media is crucial.
awesome. Now, to kind of go full circle, wrap this up a little bit, is there anything you want people out there to know about FPS Doc? It's like with the Kickstarter, you guys are doing a Indiegogo too, correct?
Indiegogo, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, will that differ from the Kickstarter pledges, or is that going to be more or less the same?
So this is sort of round 2 of funding. In fact, by the time your audience is listening to this, the Indiegogo should be up and running, so you can go back FPS at Indiegogo if you missed out on the Kickstarter. And even if you pledged to the Kickstarter already, you can upgrade your pledge at any time. But the Indiegogo will be very special for newcomers as well as those who back the Kickstarter, because with the new trailer, when we did the Kickstarter, we put together an awesome trailer, but it was almost more conceptual. Like, here's the sort of vibe we want to capture. Here's some of the games we want to celebrate. With this trailer, we'll be using interview footage and gameplay, so you can actually see, oh, wow, these are parts, snippets of the actual conversation that we'll get to explore in the film. So definitely go and back FPS on Indiegogo if you missed out on last year's round of crowdfunding, because this is going to be a really special documentary. It's a who's who cast list, probably the greatest cast list ever assembled for this genre, all in one place, so to speak. It's going to be really special.
Awesome. Brody, I believe you had one question. One question you wanted to ask David.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if you were gonna, but you have to.
I wasn't sure if I was going to either, but I definitely will. Did Randy Pitchford show you any magic tricks when you interviewed him?
Oh, I can't say for sure, man. I can't. Damn it! I'm keeping that trick up my sleeve. But maybe we'll get to explore that in the film. I don't know.
Oh yes,
See,
that's
now
the ultimate teaser right there. Yeah, if you weren't gonna watch it, you definitely have to watch it now. Oh man, that's awesome.
I already put my money into it, so I'm watching.
Yeah,
it
yeah, I'm watching it regardless. But
in on the Indiegogo.
Right.
Oh man, is there any last things you wanted to get out there about yourself, about FPS, anything you're personally working on before we wrap this show up, David?
I'll plug myself real quick. Long Live Mortal Kombat is my first in a series about exploring the making of the Mortal Kombat trilogy and its cultural impact, not just on pop culture in general, but on the fandom. I spoke to a lot of fans who shared their stories of how Mortal Kombat has changed their lives. But really, the focus is on FPS. If you haven't already, go back FPS on Indiegogo. Go follow us on Twitter at FPSDoc. We've got such cool stories told for the first time in this film. It's gonna have a runtime between 3.5 and 4 hours, and it'll just fly by like these interviews do. You're gonna love this thing. I also have to give a shout out to the FPS team: Robin, Dominic, Richard, Chris, Justin, James. I know I'm forgetting some folks because some people are in and out, but this is really a dream team. The passion of everyone is what has made this movie possible. I'm just one guy, and I'm supported by an incredible team, so we're all very excited to show all of you FPS first-person shooter.
Well, I know us at the Spawn Camp Network, myself, Brody, all the guys a part of what we're doing are extremely excited. I mean, when we told them we're talking to you, everyone was like, holy shit, how? And I'm like, just DM'd them, man. I just DM'd them. They said, we're cool.
I'm pretty easy to find. Just reach out. Yeah.
Got a couple don't mess this up type of things. The typical thing you would expect. But no, we were beyond ecstatic that you were willing to sit down and let us pick your brain about this. Not only the project, but just your, obviously deep video game knowledge as well.
Oh, yeah.
Guys, the pleasure's mine. It's been a real joy talking to you both. I appreciate the time to talk about all this stuff.
Thanks, man.
You're welcome back whenever.
Yes, please come back. We'll reel you in one more time. We are always down. So, yeah, guys, I think we're gonna wrap this episode up. But as you just heard, David, let's do it again. I'm down. We'll figure something out. I'm sure after the movie releases, I think would be kind of cool. But as always, guys, you can catch WASD and Beyond every Wednesday and Friday, 7 a.m. Wednesdays for a hot fix, Friday for the main episode. Diggity Podcast goes live on Thursdays, as does Build Bros, part of the Spawn Camp Network. Check that all out on Twitter and everywhere else you can find us. I'm just ecstatic and at a loss for words. This podcast is proudly sponsored by the good folks over at Final Boss Cult Clothing. That is the shirt I'm wearing right now. Check them out. They do a lot of amazing things. And yeah, David, thank you so much for being a part of the show. As you can see, I'm geeked up. I'm amped up. I don't even want to stop the show. That's why I'm talking still.
So, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. You've both been great.
Awesome. Thank you, David. And for all those out there, enjoy this episode. Till next time, guys, take it easy.